And thanks everybody for coming out. I see some repeat offenders. They were with me this morning. Hi guys. Great, nice to be with you this afternoon. And since I'm the only thing standing between you and a cocktail, probably, we're going to keep it moving pretty quick. Again, my name is Donna Hood-Krecka. I am with a firm called Technomic. How many folks in the room are familiar with Technomic? A couple of you, okay, great. We are a market research and consulting firm based in Chicago. We specialize on the food service and restaurant industry. So we track all aspects of the industry, everything from growth, sizing, segmentation, to menu trends, consumer trends, and major industry issues. So that's our core competency, that's what we focus on. So what I'm going to share with you today comes from some of our menu tracking, and I'll get a little bit more into how we do this and what we do. So today we're going to talk about flavor in focus, getting ahead of the trends. Flavor, of course, is one of the core aspects of your offering, and it's one of the most important things to consumers when they think about dining out or they reflect on a dining experience. It's that flavor experience that stays with them. And it's so important to your business. You see something like this and you think, oh, that's for the culinary folks. This is really a business initiative that we're talking about today, is understanding the trends in flavor. How do you capitalize them? How do you tap into them? When do you tap into them? So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about the flavor craze. Why is it important? What can it do for you? And then we're going to look at the flavor life cycle, and I'll explain what that is. And we're going to look at it through appetizers, entrees, and non-alcohol beverages. We're going to get a little geeky on the flavor front here. And then we're going to look at some trends that are occurring and talk about, what does this mean in terms of your adoption of different flavor profiles into your menu? How can you execute against it? So if anyone is interested in, having this presentation deck after the presentation, just come on up to me and give me your card or give me your email, and I'll be sure to send it to you. My email will come up at the end as well in case you want to reach out to me later. So let's talk about this flavor craze. There's so much going on in the flavor front right now in restaurant menus and the culinary scene. We've got tremendous explosion of ethnic flavors. We have consumers very, very interested in everything that's local. There's just so much going on. It's very difficult to navigate, right? So consumers are definitely highly interested in flavor experiences. And we do find that the ability to access new and unique and different flavors is really a driver for about a third of consumers. And when we kind of dig into that, we see it's younger consumers, millennials, who are the most interested in new flavor experiences. And that's going to drive a lot of their decisions, a lot of their behaviors when they think about going out to eat. So this is really important for them, and a lot of them are really kind of flavor forward. 2/3 of consumers say that they would actually go back to a restaurant where they had a really great flavor experience for a particular flavor that they enjoyed. This kind of goes to that concept of craveability. One of the reasons people go to certain restaurants is that they can get a flavor experience, an item, something that they can only get there. So that whole concept of a flavor that they enjoyed can actually drive traffic into your restaurants. Okay? And in addition, a lot of consumers are looking to explore. They want to try new flavors all the time. And we find that they are most likely to try new flavors at independent restaurants. 37% say that they're likely to try flavors at an independent restaurant. One of the reasons might be that they have a little bit more trust in the culinary expertise in a independent restaurant. Maybe they feel more comfortable with the service style, that the level of service will help them kind of navigate that new flavor experience. But there is a higher propensity to try a new flavor at an independent restaurant versus a chain restaurant. So the bottom line is, when we think about flavor, it's not just your chefs. It's the entire organization should be thinking about flavor because it drives your business. The right flavor experience, the right flavor offerings, the right flavor profiles can increase the traffic that comes into your restaurants, can increase guest satisfaction. We do a lot of studies on guest satisfaction. Flavor is always a key component of it. Can increase your guest checks because it can prompt them to try a new item, perhaps even to spend more to try a new item and have that new flavor experience. And we also see a correlation between a positive flavor experience and the guest's intent to return to your restaurant and their intent to recommend your restaurant. So when we talk about flavors, this is a key component of your business, of driving your business forward. So we need to think about it in that way. Technomic has developed something that we call the flavor life cycle, and this is kind of a structure through which you can start to approach, how do I deal with all these myriad flavors that are out there? How do I know when to bring something in? Through this capability, what we've done is we've mined the data in our Menu Monitor database. And so this is almost 20,000 restaurant menus that we update on a quarterly basis. We actually take the verbatim item and the descriptor, any descriptive terms, information about ingredients, different words that people are using to describe things. We put them into this database and we start to track when a flavor starts to come in, how it proliferates and spreads through the industry. And what this has enabled us to do, we do this quarter to quarter to quarter, and we do year-over-year comparisons to see how a flavor is moving and spreading through the industry. It gives us the ability to start to predict when things are going to hit, when they're going to pop, when they're going to slow down. So that's our approach to the flavor life cycle. So I'm going to share some of that with you today, and hopefully you can bring some home and start to think about where am I on this. So that we have 4 stages in the flavor life cycle on menus in US restaurants today. The first stage is introduction. And of course, this is when a flavor first starts to percolate. It first comes on, starts popping up. Now, typically, new flavor innovation, the introduction really starts in chef-driven independent restaurants. This is typically where we first see flavors start to surface and emerge. The second stage is the growth stage, and this is when it starts to kind of go beyond those independent players, those chef-driven players, and start to go out a little bit more broadly into the industry. And that's when we start to see it going into the higher-end casual dining chains, maybe like a Seasons 52, or Bonefish Grill, something like that that's a little bit on the higher end. The third stage in the flavor life cycle is called mainstream. That's when things really start to pop, and we start to see them in the more broad menu, traditional casual dining restaurants, as well as fast casual restaurants. So everything from Panera to maybe Applebee's or Fridays, you'll start to see the flavors then making their way onto those menus. And then finally, flavors become mature. And this is when they are widespread across the industry. You can pretty much find them anywhere. You're going to see them less so in those higher end, but definitely kind of ubiquitous across, McDonald's and Burger King and, even the mid-scale family segment of full service. So your Denny's, your IHOPs, your big boys. That's when things are mature and widely accepted. So this is great, Donna, but what do I do with it? How do I know when to bring things in? Well, it depends on where your particular restaurant is in terms of its innovation strategy around flavor. And I would urge everybody, if you haven't gathered your team together and said, okay, where are we on flavor innovation? Where do we stand? What's our position? I would say it's very wise to sit down with your team and do that. A couple of reasons. One, you need to understand where you need to be on R&D and new menu item introduction, new flavor introduction, right? But you also want to have a really defined position to your guest. You want the guests to be able to understand, what can they expect when they walk in your door? Because they've got perceptions around you. You want to make sure that you're aligned and that you're clear to the guest on what they can expect from your menu. So bring your team together and have that conversation. We've gone through our databases and everything that we track about restaurants, and we've come up with 4 different innovation strategies around flavors that we see most operators kind of fitting into, and you may recognize yourself here. The first one is the innovators. Again, these are the chef-driven restaurants. They're the ones that are willing to take risks. In fact, they like to be on the bleeding edge of what's hot and be the first one out there with a new flavor. These are the folks that are going to, really kind of get involved when things are at the introductory phase and also probably at the growth phase. Then we have the operators, who take the strategy of being ahead of the curve. Again, they're chef-inspired, but they're kind of following those bleeding edge folks, right? They're kind of watching what's going on there and adopting the things that they think are interesting or going to gain some traction. Okay, they're not necessarily first to market, but they're definitely ahead of the curve they're going to play more in the growth and the early mainstream. Okay, that's where those folks are going to play. The next strategy group is the adopt the popular. These folks are going to play more in the mainstream area. Okay, these are the folks who've been watching. They see something has traction, and it's gaining, kind of wider acceptance. Having one of those days. It's the end of the day, right? So it's gaining wider acceptance, and essentially they've kind of let other people do the heavy lifting on whether or not this flavor is going to take off. And okay, so now we're going to go with it because it's definitely gaining traction. And then finally, there's the folks who only go with the proven favorites. All right, these are the restaurant operators who look for the flavors that are widely appealing to all different types of consumers, right? And they can apply it across different areas of their menu. So, these are the folks that are really going to go after the the mature flavors, the ones that have proven, they have traction, widespread appeal. So you might see yourself here if you say, oh, I'm a little of this, a little of that. You might want to sharpen your innovation strategy when it comes to flavors. So let's talk through kind of what's the flavor life cycle look like in different parts of the menu. And we'll start with appetizers. When you think about your appetizers, this is literally the first taste that a guest has of your restaurant. It's the first time that they get cues as to kind of what's your culinary approach, right? So what can they expect for the rest of the meal? So your appetizers are an important part to be thinking about when you think about your approach to flavors and what you should be bringing in. So we have kind of bucketed flavors into a couple of different types. We've actually got 6 for appetizers. There's a whole lot of information here, right? We'll walk through some of the trends. When we look at bold flavors, and when we talk about bold flavors, we're really kind of talking about heat primarily, and different acidities and things like that. So let's look at the mature flavors in bold. We see buffalo, chili, chipotle, honey mustard, jalapeno pepper. These are the things that are mature. They've been around for a while. Everybody's familiar with them, okay? We back it up and we look into what's mainstream, what's gaining that acceptance and starting to go more widespread on menus. And you see it gets a little more granular. Chorizo, ginger, mustard, sriracha is now considered mainstream. But look at growth and also intro. When we look at intro, this is what the high-end chefs are playing with in appetizers. The flavors that we're seeing starting to pop up and surface there are brandy, which is interesting because it kind of follows that whole trend of bringing spirits-based flavors onto your menu, and also sour. We'll see this pop up in a couple of different places, but this tells you kind of how the palate is shifting. On the rich front, rich relates to flavors, ingredients, items that have a higher fat content. So you're going to see a lot of cheeses here, right? A lot of dairy-based items here. So in appetizers, the mature ones, we're all very familiar with them. Blue cheese, cheddar, cream feta, mozzarella, kind of the more neutrally flavored and very, very familiar things are going to be on the mature side. But then when we kind of look at the mainstream, we see cream cheese there, which I think is interesting. I kind of think of that as kind of a boomerang. It was popular years ago, kind of coming back. Goat cheese, Monterey Jack. When we look at the growth, here's where we see some cheeses and some items that have some different flavor profiles. So we see Asiago, we see Brie, buttermilk has that down-home, thick, creamy flavor, Gouda, Gruyere, Manchego, Pecorino, Ricotta. There's a lot going on there, okay, on the growth segment of it. But I think it's significant when we see that there's really nothing surfacing in terms of the introductory phase. This is not an area where those chef-driven concepts are playing for appetizers on the rich flavor profile front. So it tells you that there's a little bit of a shift there, away from those rich flavors. And when we look here, we see it seems to be that the higher end chefs are starting to move towards fruity flavors for appetizer. On the intro section, we see a lot of varietal citrus, like blood orange, Meyer lemon, preserved lemon. We also see some exotics like papaya coming in. These are things that really we hadn't seen much before in appetizers, but now with the whole shift in focus towards some ethnic cuisines, towards better for you, fresher flavors, we're seeing fruity flavors coming into the appetizer side of the menu at the high-end restaurants, at the chef-driven locations. And on the fruity front, there's very little that's already mature. So this indicates that the fruit flavor profile might be an area that's ripe for exploration in your appetizer portion of your menu. Also, we see a similar trend in spice. A lot of activity at the higher end in spice in terms of appetizers, and very little that's mature, really just basil and cilantro. So that gives you a feeling for kind of what's next, what's coming in appetizers. Ethnic and appetizer, a lot of activity, continues to be, you know, a lot of drawing on the ethnic traditions. On the intro, we see Hawaiian. You'll see that pop up a couple of times. Lemongrass, saffron, sweet and sour. We're seeing some more aromatics, some different types of flavor profiles, drawing on, you know, Asia Pacific, drawing on, you know, Thai basil, you know, just some Indian, different types of flavor profiles coming in on appetizers. And a lot of activity across the board on ethnic. There's a lot of things that are moving through, but when we look at what's mature, think about your appetizer offerings. Are they all mature? Do you need to pull some things in that are starting to percolate, starting to trend up? Is it appropriate for you to do that in your organization, in your menu? Also, keep in mind that ethnic flavors are highly appealing to consumers overall, but particularly to younger consumers. So if that's a group you're going after, you really need to be focusing on these flavor profiles in your appetizer offerings. And then other, I asked some of our researchers, I'm like, what's with the other? Help me out with that, you know? They said, you know, it's stuff that doesn't fit neatly into any of the other categories. But what we see there is, you know, there's some savory profiles there. There's some herbal profiles there. There's some vegetal profiles there. So kind of a mixed bag. But again, we're not seeing a lot percolating up at the high end. We see a lot of activity among ethnic and also fruity at the high end for appetizers. So that gives you a sense of like what's coming. So the thing with flavors, of course, it's very dynamic. It's not static. They move through the flavor life cycle. So it's important to know, like, when is something going to jump? So we looked at all the data, and this is kind of our take on things that we think are going to jump into the next level within the next couple of months. Moving into mature would be Hispanic flavors for appetizers, sriracha. How many people think sriracha is kind of already mature? I kind of look at that, and I do think it's really already mature. I'm sure next time we do all this pull of data, it'll be already in the mature. Dill, grape, mustard, pineapple, all of that going into mature. Going into mainstream, we see some of those more defined, pronounced, different flavor profiles, you know, like remoulade and gorgonzola. Lemongrass, we do see moving from intro going into a growth category. Okay, so we want to keep an eye on when is something going to jump? When is it appropriate for me to bring it in based on what my innovation strategy is around flavors? And we kind of dove in. I just want to give you some examples of some things that we see popping, some ways that folks are actually using some of these trends. Chart House does a great job with a Hawaiian spice tuna poke. Very, very popular there. They just really added that. Thai basil popping up at Snap Kitchen, which is a fast casual chain out of Austin. A lot going on there in a soup, and then they've got it kind of topped with a Thai basil to give it that added zing. Ponzu, and we're seeing this pop up here and there more and more frequently. I think this is going to move through pretty quickly this year. Here we see an example from Echo in Palm Beach, California, with a tuna tatake. I can never say that. That involves a ponzu. So we're definitely seeing a lot of different things happening in appetizers, but kind of an evolution, you know, a move away from that heavy, thick, maybe fried or cheesy appetizer towards more lighter, ethnic, open up the palate types of flavor profiles. So entrees. This is really where you make your flavor statement, right? This is where you know, consumers have usually their most memorable flavor experience when they come out and they dine with you. You know, this is where you really make your kind of your stake in the ground in terms of where you're at on flavors. So what we see is that consumers are definitely looking for more flavor adventures when it comes to the entrees. And more than half say that they want to see more interesting flavors for vegetarian and vegan offerings. We see a high demand for interesting, unique, differentiated offerings that are vegetarian or vegan. This is driven quite a bit by younger consumers, but we do see just the whole vegetarian offering becoming just more in demand by consumers in general. But you can see here that they're looking for more flavors across kind of the center of the plate protein, mostly in vegan and vegetarian, beef also, and then it drops off a little bit for seafood and pork. And they're looking for more ethnic flavors and ingredients with primarily with chicken. That's, of course, the most frequently consumed protein for entrees, but also a high demand there for pork, seafood, and beef. So consumers are pretty much saying we want to see more flavor innovation in terms of entrees and what you're doing, particularly around proteins. So what does this look like? How does this play out? In terms of entrees, let's take a look at the mature. Again, everything that we're pretty comfortable, we're all pretty familiar with: buffalo, Cajun, Chipotle, chorizo, coffee, honey mustard, and all the things that we're familiar with in terms of bold flavors are there. But let's back up a little bit. Intro, only sour. We saw sour in appetizers, right, as at the introductory phase, and also tart. So again, this tells us that the flavor profile overall, the trends are starting to shift towards more acidity, perhaps, away from heat and more towards acidity. When we look at the rich flavor profiles, again, we see not a lot of activity in the introductory phase on the rich flavor profiles. So that gives us a signal that things are shifting. They might be shifting towards more lighter flavors. And indeed, it looks like they are. Because when we look at what's in the introductory phase on the fruity front, I think it's really interesting that there's so much activity there. And the level of activity there we see is kind of similar to what we saw in appetizers. And we see some similar flavor profiles. Your varietal citrus, some exotics, and then in the growth phase, apricot, green apple, pomegranate, a lot of acidity there, some mild sweetness. So it tells you things are definitely changing. On the spice front, again, similar to what we saw in appetizers, not a lot of activity at the intro level, and a lot of things moving towards maturity or already mature. The ethnic front, we see a lot of activity in all phases of the flavor life cycle on the ethnic front, similar to what we saw in appetizers, right? That there was a tremendous amount of activity in each single stage. But what we see as mature right now is Asian, barbecue, guacamole is considered mature. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that it's everywhere. It's very hard to differentiate yourself around something that is everywhere. So if you can find a way to differentiate with it, that's fantastic because everyone's familiar with it. But just be aware, if you really want to make your statement, you have to find a way to present it in a new, unique, and interesting way. But what's trending up on the ethnic front, we see more Indian, Middle Eastern, Thai, different flavors from what we consider to be the emerging ethnic cuisines starting to come in at the introductory level. This is what we are seeing in terms of the innovators are starting to bring these flavors in, and the more familiar, the Asian in general, Hispanic flavors reaching maturity. I love this other bucket because I think this is where a lot of the innovation's really happening. So throughout it, we see different flavors. There's a lot of nut flavors in there, which I think is interesting. We actually see, almond as a mature flavor. And then we see in the mainstream, we see peanut and peanut butter. And I kind of went into that. How is peanut and peanut butter in an entree? Like, how is that being expressed? And what we see through the database is that there's a tremendous amount of chicken dishes, Middle Eastern chicken dishes, that have like a peanut sauce, a peanut dipping sauce, maybe a chicken satay or something like that. And also sesame noodles, things like that, that are kind of more ethnic. But they're coming in. Peanut butter is absolutely adored by millennials. They grew up with it. So they like to see different expressions of it. So peanut butter is kind of, peanut butter kind of going mainstream. But then when we look at what's at the introductory level, kind of what are the innovators playing in, We see caviar, which I think is interesting because I don't necessarily think of it as a flavor. I think of it as a thing, but it's popping up as kind of a flavor, as an ingredient in the higher end restaurants. And chocolate. And we bolded that because we're seeing it really start to percolate, really start to come on in entree dishes, in these higher end chef driven locations, that chocolate is coming on, and it's being used on proteins. It's being used in all sorts of different dishes. Here we called out that it's being used with beets and also bone marrow. So there's all different applications of chocolate. We do find through some of our other research that consumers are well aware that there's all different types of chocolate. So this whole idea of bringing a dark chocolate in here or a lighter chocolate there, different types of chocolates you can play with can differentiate a dish, can bring a different flavor profile. I recently saw chocolate covered bacon on top of a steak. It was amazing. But you know, there's all different ways to play with chocolate. Definitely broadens the appeal. So entrees, we're seeing some of the shifts that we saw in appetizer, going towards more fruit, going towards more lighter flavors, maybe a better for you flavor profile. So what's about to jump? Well, into maturity, sriracha, again, I think it's really already there. Gouda and brie making the jump into maturity. Going into mainstream, ancho, pomegranate, thyme, pecorino. So things are kind of moving through. And what's going to go from intro to growth, we see caviar, which I think will be interesting to see how people grab onto that and what they can do with it. Munster and tamarind. So again, you're seeing some ethnic flavors being introduced. You're seeing things from different traditions, but it seems to be a move away from richer flavors and towards either more kind of heat, spice defined, ethnic, or fruitier, kind of lighter, kind of had that better for you feel to them. Where we see it playing out in a couple places in terms of entrees, masala at Veggie Grill, which is a fast casual vegetarian concept out of Southern California. They're doing a masala bowl, a lot going on in that, but kind of what they're leading with there is the masala flavor. Fats Cafe, which is a casual dining concept out of the East Coast. They're doing a calabash chicken that's got a pimento mac and cheese topping. And it's got a sriracha mayonnaise. There's a whole lot going on right there, right? And then chow chow. Anybody here using chow chow? It's like a pickled relish. We're seeing that pop up more and more, and that gives you that vinegar, that acidity that we're starting to see more and more on menus. It's kind of more popular throughout the South as well. So here we see an example from New Orleans. Non-alcohol beverages. This is often the overlooked part of your menu, right? Put a couple sodas on and move on. I would argue that this is an area where you can definitely ramp up your profitability, but the only way to really do that is to menu things that are unique and different. You know, like some kind of a signature non-alcohol drink, something they can only get in your restaurant, will make a difference to the guest, will make you a destination, and you can upcharge, you can charge a premium for it, and something that's already a pretty high margin, you can increase the margin on. Great opportunity area of your menu, and also a wonderful place for you to play around with flavors. How far can I take things? You know, what can I start to pull in and see if it's got any traction with my guest? So when we look at non-alcohol beverage, we definitely see that things are changing on this front, kind of as we saw with entrees and appetizers. But the trend is a little different. When we look at fruity, look at how many things have already reached maturity. Because everyone's familiar with fruity drinks, right? I mean, kids love them. Everybody loves a little sweet non-alcohol drink. So we see that column for mature, there's a lot in there. You know, you got apple, you got banana, orange, you know, peach we're calling out because we're seeing a lot of people, yes, peach is mature. But again, that's one of those particular flavors that we see people really innovating with. They're using peach in sparkling water, peach in agua frescas, in Italian sodas, in iced teas, in lemonade. It's very, very popular. It goes with a lot of different flavor profiles, very complementary, and it's highly appealing. So that's one that, while it's mature, I think it's a great example of where you can experiment and really, really play to bring them something different. What I think is interesting here is that there's not a tremendous amount of activity at the higher level, at that intro level, on the fruity front. Again, we see some varietal citrus with the blood orange. We see the lemon verbena. We see pear, which is definitely a unique flavor. It's kind of tough to work with, but they're playing with it at the higher end. So we're seeing a shift here. What we see kind of coming in terms of non-alcohol beverages are absolutely more aromatic. And I think that this is really driven by what we've seen happen in alcohol beverages, where people have really recognized that, you know, a lot of your flavor perception happens through your olfactory, happens through your nose. So with an alcohol beverage, there's been a whole movement in mixology that when you lift the drink to the nose, particularly on a cocktail, you know, we know to do this for a glass of wine, but now on cocktails and even in beer, people are recognizing that the aroma that comes off the drink has a lot to do with the flavor perception of the drink and your enjoyment of the drink. So now we're seeing that coming into the non-alcohol side, and we're seeing more aromatics at the higher end. So they're playing with basil, they're playing with lavender, they're playing with peppermint. You know, these are things that are known to give off these great aromas and create this wonderful experience. So it'll be interesting to see how those flow through, how quickly they flow through. Not a lot in the growth segment there on aromatics. And same with sweet. You know, we just saw not a lot of activity on fruity in beverages, a lot of mature, not a lot of activity at the higher end. We see the same thing happening in the sweet bucket of flavors, right? There's a lot of things that have reached maturity, but very, very little experimentation. Nothing's really kind of surfacing and popping in sweet in non-alcohol beverages. So I think that kind of tells you that the sweet trend in NA beverages has kind of passed, and now we're seeing more aromatics, more natural fruit flavors coming in, more sour, more acidic. We saw a lot of citrus. And then on the other front, again, it's kind of a mixed bag, so you see a lot going on here. But the one I wanted to kind of call out on the intro phase is bitter. And again, I think that this is driven by a lot of other things. The whole coffee craze has shifted the American palate to be more in tune with bitter flavor profiles. On the alcohol front, I don't know if any of you have full bars or whatever, but you may have seen the trend for the Negroni and other cocktails that include Amaros and Camparis and, you know, different bitter liqueurs. There's definitely much more interest in bitter flavor profiles. So now we're seeing it start to come in the introductory phase on non-alcohol beverages. So, you know, is that a flavor profile that you could potentially play with on the non-alcohol side? And again, this gives you the opportunity to offer something really unique, really distinctive, you know, a signature non-alcohol drink at a higher price point and still get a great margin out of it and deliver a great experience for the guest. So what's about to jump on the NA beverage front? Into maturity, we see chai, which I think is interesting because that only popped about 2 years ago, really started to pop. Pomegranate, mint we're seeing in a lot of teas, a lot of lemonades, cinnamon, honey. What's coming out of introductory going into growth is blood orange and pear. Again, pear is kind of tough to work with. You really have to play with your balance there, but it is a tremendous flavor. So that gives you a sense of like how things are moving. Okay, so where are we seeing this play out? True Food Kitchen, it's a great concept out of Chicago. It's all natural, organic, local. You know, they're playing with peppermint in their loose leaf tea. They've got a kind of a signature beverage going on there. Starbucks, always a good one to look at in terms of kind of what's cutting edge. Always pay attention to what Starbucks is testing because they they play with a lot of things. They don't go full blown with them. So try and pay attention to that when you can. You know, they've got the Emerald City Mule, which has a burnt cinnamon syrup. So it's definitely a different flavor profile. We have seen burnt kind of trend over the past year or so in terms of a preparation method. And now we see that burnt, smoky, caramelized flavor coming across in this drink. And then prickly pear at Bertucci's. So that kind of gives you that sense of taking the guest kind of to the next level. You know, they're familiar with certain fruits. Well, what is prickly pear? It gives you that chance to have the conversation with the guest about something they may not be familiar with. So a couple of things, none of this is happening in a vacuum, right? While you guys are all trying to keep up with all the flavor trends and when do I bring them in and everything, you're also dealing with other consumer demands. But some of these consumer demands give you an opportunity to play with your flavor profiles and bring some new things in. One of the biggest trends that we're of course tracking is the consumer demand around healthy items. And we see here that a third of consumers say that they're eating more healthy items specifically for the nutritional benefit. Maybe they choose it because you say it's protein enriched, or maybe you choose it because, maybe they're choosing it because they know that one of the ingredients is high in antioxidants. So they're looking for those types of ingredients, and a third of them say that they're increasing it, and a third also say that they're ordering healthy items more often in restaurants. So this is an ongoing trend. But what we see, one of the questions that always pops up is it healthy? If it's healthy, is it going to taste good, right? That's always the question. Because when consumers dine out, going back to what I said in the beginning, they really want to have an excellent flavor experience. That's one of the reasons that they come through the door, So if they're going to eat healthy, can it also be tasty? Well, to understand the answer to that question, kind of have to think about how do consumers define health right now? How do they define healthy eating? Because it's different than it was just 3, 4, 5 years ago. It used to be all about denial. I'm eating healthy, so I'm not going to have anything that has a lot of sodium or a lot of fat or a lot of calories. I have to deny myself things in order to eat healthy. And quite often, that denial meant that they would sacrifice flavor, right? Because once you take all the salt out of something, take a lot of the flavor out. When you take all the fat out of something, you take a lot of the flavor components out. So in the consumer's mind, years ago when it was all about denial, no, if it was healthy, it wasn't going to taste good. So they've kind of been conditioned. But now there's a complete shift in how consumers approach healthy eating. And today it's more about nutrition. It's more about what I can put into my body to increase my energy, to make me healthier. And so they're interested in nutrients, they're interested in protein, they're interested in antioxidants, right? It's more about what can I feed my body with? That's what makes something healthy. So in today's day and age, they equate things that are going to give their bodies nutrients with being fresh and being healthy. Being fresh, being natural, those types of things. And because that they have that connection to freshness and that demand for delivery of nutrients, now the consumer approaches things that are better for me. Chances are they're going to taste good because they're going to be fresh. They're going to be more natural. They're going to be less processed. So the consumer mindset has shifted. They now realize that I don't have to sacrifice flavor in order to eat healthier, in order to eat foods that are better for me. So it's important to kind of wrap your brain around that when you talk on your menu, when you're describing things. Talk less about what it doesn't have, talk more about what it does have in terms of what nutrients or what benefit can it deliver to them. And that's going to ramp up their perception that it's going to taste better. One area where we really see this playing out is when we talk about natural and organic. What's interesting about those two terms, neither one of them really means that it'll be better for you, right? But it's what we call a health halo term. People perceive it as being better for you if it's natural or if it's organic. And here you see that we ask consumers, so if a food or beverage is described as natural or organic, is it going to taste better or worse? The same. And overwhelmingly, consumers come back and say if it's natural or organic, more than half say that it's going to taste better than if it were not, than if it were processed or whatever it might be. And about a third say that it doesn't have any impact on taste. So again, that's not going to push them away from it. They're going to say, all right, it's better for me and it's going to taste good. Awesome, I'm there. Clean label is a demand that we see growing definitely among consumers. Clean referring to things that are not processed, right? They don't have additives, preservatives, things like that. So a third say that something that's clean label is going to be better tasting than things that are not. Or about 6 out of 10 say it's not going to have any impact on taste. So things being healthy no longer mean that you have to sacrifice flavor. But those descriptors are really, really important on your menu to get that perception across, to give them permission to order these dishes even if they're trying to eat healthier. The other big demand that we're tracking, and this has been going on for several years, is this consumer demand for customization. And when we talk about customization in a restaurant or in a food service setting, it's really about the consumer wanting to control their experience, right? They want to have a say. They want it to be personalized. They want to engage. They want to be involved in the preparation of whatever it is they're eating or drinking. And this gives them control over a lot of things. They can control the portion size. So if they're trying to eat healthier, then they can control the potential calorie intake. They can control the cost, which is huge specifically for younger consumers. And then they can control the ingredients and therefore the flavor profile. They can turn the heat up, they can turn the heat down. They can make it super sweet, they can make it completely acidic, whatever they want to do. But today's consumer really does want control, and that increases their perception of the value of their experience of dining with you. So you give them that control, it ramps up their value perception. But how do you do that, right? It's not so easy. Not everybody can do made to order or let everybody pick what they want to do. But I wanted to share with you two good examples of full service restaurants that are giving the consumer the opportunity to customize their experience. One is a really cool place out of Manhattan called the Meatball Shop. If you ever get into Manhattan, definitely look it up. I have 2 teenage boys. If they could live there, they would. Because all the Meatball Shop does is meatballs, okay? So you sit down and you're handed a pencil and this sheet that says make a plate. And you check the box. You decide what kind of meatball do you want. And I don't know if you guys can actually see it, but you can choose from classic beef, spicy pork, chicken, salmon, vegetable, and whatever the weekly special is. You can choose your sauce on your meatballs. Classic tomato, spicy meat sauce, Parmesan cream. Then you get to pick how do you want to consume your meatballs. Would you like them as sliders? Would you like them in an entree? Would you like them in a hero? The individual's making all these decisions, but think about the ingredients, think about what they're offering. It's very contained in terms of the ingredients, in terms of the prep they're doing in the back of the house. It's the final assembly that needs a lot of attention and execution because it's being dictated by the customer. It's very interactive, it's a ton of fun, and it gives the guest the control over the experience. It's very differentiating, and it also invites them to come back and try a different combination. It's endless combinations, endless different dishes that you can do. But for them, it's a very, very clean-cut, straightforward way to be able to customize and let the guest have a different flavor experience every time they come in. The other one that's kind of the masters on this, of course, is Buffalo Wild Wings. They have that extensive selection of sauces for their wings, and they give you this whole chart. They give you a way to navigate the selection and allow you to control the heat, right? You can mix it up. You can have 20 that are super hot. You can have 10 that are less. You can go up and down the heat scale however you want. So that's something that defines Buffalo Wild Wings, but it differentiates, but it gives the guest control and also a reason to come back and keep trying some different flavors and sauces. And then if you're in a limited service restaurant environment, right, how do I customize? That's a kind of a tough proposition in the limited service segment, but there's a couple of ways that it happens. One is the made to order. And this became really, popular through Chipotle, of course, created the Chipotle model where you kind of go down the line and you say, I'll have some of that, none of that, extra of that. You build your bowl, you build your meal. Now we see in fast casual, we see the build your own pizzas. Everything now is build your own. We even see it in convenience stores, and the photo actually up here is from Sheetz out of Pennsylvania, which is a C-store chain that really has very, very sharp food service operation. And what they're doing is using touchscreen ordering kiosks to allow the guests to customize everything. Your coffee drink, your sandwich, your wrap, your salad, everything. It's almost like they give them a list of ingredients and let you build whatever you want. But that's how they're executing it, is with the touchscreen kiosks. It cuts down on inaccuracies in the order. It just speeds everything up for them. But we're also tracking the rise of food bars in the limited service segment, both hot food bars and cold food bars. where essentially, again, the guests can build their own plate. They can try different flavor profiles. They can combine different things, but you're putting the control in their hands of, you know, how they want to assemble their meal, what flavor experience they want to have. Of course, you have to have some really, really good food safety best practices if you're going to do hot and cold food bars, but that's one option as well. But to me, the low-hanging fruit, if you're in a limited service environment, is to offer condiment bars. You know, we're all pretty well versed in the, you know, the condiment bars that we see at coffee shops with different creamers and chocolate sprinkles and, you know, everything you could possibly imagine to put in your coffee or your tea or your hot cocoa. You can take that same concept and apply it to entrees or appetizers by offering condiment bars that have, you know, flavored ketchups, flavored mustard, flavored mayos. Bring some of these different flavor profiles that we see trending. Is that a way to bring them in and offer them to your guests? And thereby that would differentiate you. Can you bring in kind of the next level flavor into a series of flavored ketchups? Can you bring in some of these trending cheeses that are starting to pop up? Give them a chance to try it. Give them a chance to, you know, experiment. And for you and for them, it's very low investment. It's a condiment, but it's a great way to give them the opportunity to control their flavor experience and, you know, try something new. So some food for thought, some key takeaways today. One is that consumers definitely prioritize the flavor experience. You know, this is really what it comes down to. That's what they remember you for, is the flavor experience. They want new, they want unique, they want ethnic flavors. And, you know, again, this isn't just something for your culinary experts to be thinking about. This is a business driver for you. It will drive traffic, it will drive repeat business, it will drive up checks. So you need to look at it through the lens of your business model. When are you going to adopt new flavors? How are you going to play with this opportunity? The other thing is to clarify, what is your flavor innovation strategy? You know, you need to understand, where do I sit? Because then you can start to say, okay, if I'm going to adopt the popular, then I need to be looking at, you know, the folks behind me, the innovators, and, you know, start to see, what are they playing with? Let me see how it's doing. And, you know, that's a matter of going out in your own neighborhood and kind of identifying, okay, I'm going to adopt the popular. Who are the innovators in my, you know, in my area? What are they doing? Because that's what your guest is being exposed to. At what point can you start to bring some of the things that they're playing with and they're getting traction with? When can I start to bring it into my menu? Let them do the heavy lifting, but watch what they're doing. Okay, you want to stay on top of that. And meet with your team, make sure everybody's on the same page. Because when you talk about flavor innovation, you have to be careful about, where will your guests give you permission to go? You know, you don't want to push them too far where they're just like, I don't get it. But you also want to keep things fresh and new. So you got to find that balance, see where they'll go with you. And then to that point, identify, you know, where is the tipping point for a flavor? When is it going to start to move out of the high-end chefs and into high-end casual dining and then into traditional dining? Keep an eye, you know, when you go out yourself, what's popping up on menus in different segments of the industry, and keep track of what we're reporting on, because we talk about this a lot. And then, of course, you know, consumers, they're looking for customization, they're looking for healthier options. Those trends give you great opportunities to play with flavors, explore them, and, you know, put them out there and see if they gain traction with your guest. So that's what I had for you today. Woo, I did that quick. Well, somewhat quick, I guess. Any questions or anything that makes you go, huh? What about teas and coffees? Coffee flavors. Well, coffee is definitely a trending flavor. I think it's mature at this point. Straight coffee, but if you talk about like varietal coffee, estate coffees, you know, if you really get into Arabica or whatever you want to do, it's still percolating, pun intended. You know, but some of those more specific types of coffee, if you can call out a particular type of bean or something, you know, it's not necessarily mainstream, but coffee as a flavor definitely is mature. Different types of tea. Well, we saw chai is moving into maturity, which I think is interesting, because like I said, that only popped a couple of years ago. You know, different things move through the flavor life cycle at different paces. You know, Sriracha hit like 3 years ago. It just exploded and went crazy. But when we started tracking it about 5 or 6 years ago, you know, so it kind of comes out of the darkness, and then boom, it's in McDonald's and everybody's talking about it. And it's like, well, it's already kind of gone when we're at that point. But teas, same thing. You know, tea as a flavor is pretty much everywhere in terms of iced tea, whatnot. But when you start talking about white tea, green tea, Rubios, whatever it might be, you're going to have to do a little bit of education of your guests, play with it a little bit, because it's not quite mature. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's always the question, and that kind of goes back to knowing your clientele. Where will they give you permission to go? Where will they go with you? Right. So they have to have a lot of trust in you, in your chef, in your culinary position. They have to understand it. What I would say is, again, where else are they dining? Right. What are they drinking on the alcohol front? Because in the steakhouse, the flavors that they're gravitating towards in alcohol can give you some cues. So if you've got Negronis flying across the bar, that tells you that they'll go bitter. Okay. If they're still drinking flavored martinis with like the super sticky sweet stuff, you got to stay with the sweet, but maybe you could go towards fruity. I would say your appetizer menu might be a good place for you to play with flavors. Again, it's low cost to them. They might be willing to try something new, and you can train your staff to help them navigate it. I'd be real careful about your center of the plate proteins. Maybe you can give them the option maybe to customize their steak. You could top it with, these 3 different sauces. Let me explain them to you. Let me bring you a sample of all 3, and you can play with them. So it'd be really, kind of baby steps, but definitely look at your bar and see what they're drinking, because the alcohol has a lot to do with the flavor profiles that they're after. Okay. Any other one here? I did not dive into bakery, but I know in bakery we're seeing more ethnic, we're seeing more Hispanic, Latin bakery items coming in, particularly at breakfast. And we're also seeing more, I was talking to one of the analysts about this the other day, we're seeing more citrus come in the bakery in the morning. And again, away from super sweet. And chocolate, when we see chocolate, it's more bitter chocolates in bakery. I have one more over here. Mm-hmm. I would say, if you want to look at kind of what's in the introductory phase, I mean, you can go on our website too. We do some free newsletters and stuff that shares some of this. I can also send you this presentation if you're interested. But as far as like understanding like what's an introductory in my market, I would absolutely, read the blogs on the local restaurants, follow the local kind of celebrity chefs or the chefs that are kind of pushing the cutting edge, and see if they pop something on their menu. And they started out, typically they'll start out sort of small, play with it a little bit and see if it catches, and then they'll kind of blow it up, maybe use it in an entree. Watch what they do with it. If they move away from it quickly, take note of that. If they start using it in different places in their menu, then it's gonna start to pop. But yes, the trade magazines, the blogs, the food bloggers in your area, and you got to go out and do some of your own research as well, so that like, okay, this is my type of guest, but I also know, maybe I'm a casual dining restaurant, but I know that, when it's an anniversary or a graduation or, it's just a special night out, I know that they go to this restaurant. What's happening in this restaurant? Is there something that I can pull and put into an appetizer or put into a different spot just to give my menu a little pop? Okay. All right, cool. Thank you everybody for sticking with me, and if anybody does want the presentation, come on up, I'll take your card, or you can email me. Thanks very much.